John D. Rockefeller Sr. said, "A great responsibility rests upon newspapers. There is an ethical duty they owe to the community which I sometimes feel they regard too lightly. These stories about my wealth have a bad effect on a class of people with whom it is becoming difficult to deal. The stress which is laid in those stories arouses hatred and envy not against the individual, but only against organized society. It is the general trend I have in mind which is arraying the masses against the classes." Well, John D., wherever you are, we'll do our best tonight on Alternative Views. Hi, welcome to Alternative Views. Tonight, with the death of Nelson Rockefeller recently, we take a look at the vast empire of the Rockefellers, both historically and we take a look at their activities. But before then, we go to the news as usual. Frank, for the first story.
Well, you remember a while back when Carter said, okay, nobody's going to get any more than 7% raise, and the corporate managers and the executive pay specialists were just aghast. But they're all smiles now, because the old double standard's coming back into effect. The government workers, of course, if they're lucky, they're going to get 7. The unions, they're settling for 7 many places. However, these rules aren't expected to disrupt most of the corporate compensation programs, because the companies are going to be allowed to decide how they want to divide up the company pot under this 7% guideline. Some executives can get more than 7, some less. And the administration is exempting from the bonus guidelines these bonus payments based on last year's performance. So the employers are given some flexibility to exempt subsequent bonuses if they're based on profit margins which prove unexpectedly high.
Unexpectedly.
Yeah. And it also allows employers to exclude from the guideline the effects in legitimate promotions and changes in workforce compensation. So now the businessmen are smiling again, and they're heaping praise in the White House on wage and price stability.
These are the same people that were asking us to tighten our belts here a few years ago and learn how to live with a reduced standard of living.
Yeah. Today we got 2 economists here with us, so I'll ask them, what is the significance of this? There was a little mention in the Wall Street Journal that foreign holders of U.S. debt received $15 billion in interest in 1978. Does that have any particular significance as far as our economy or the continuing taking over of industries and land by foreign interests, or does it have any significance? It's been going on all these years.
Maybe for purposes of identification, joining us on the panel this evening is Harry Cleaver from the Economics Department for an encore performance. He really did a smashing job a few weeks ago when he came and talked about inflation. He's going to join us tonight talking about the Rockefellers.
Smash Rockefeller tonight. Good. No comments on the $18 billion in interest?
Yes, the interest primarily comes from U.S. government bonds, which are being sold abroad to finance the national debt. It's a new development, and they're being called Carter bonds. Many of them are being bonds are being sold for foreign currencies, and interest is being paid on that. The other interest can come from regular stock holdings, other forms of non-governmental bonds, I suppose. But the outflow of debt itself, the payments on the debt, is to be expected from that.
Right.
From that.
Well, we're talking about Rockefeller, and that means millionaires. The Spotlight had this report. In 1952, there were 13,000 millionaires. But in 1979, we have 250,000 of them. However, for a millionaire in 1979 to make as much as a millionaire in 1952, he would have to have $7,692,307.60.
And we're biting the bullet, aren't they?
Well over 50% of the millionaires are women, too, Frank.
Oh, they are?
Yeah. At least we discriminate on this program.
That's right. We have a media report here in just a second with Doug, but I don't know if you have this one about William Buckley, you know, that moral pontificator, you know, the guy with the big vocabulary.
One of the funniest stories I've read in a long time, but go ahead, Frank.
No, well, if you got it, go ahead. Okay, anyway, Buckley personally has to repay more than $600,000 to stockholders of a company, the Star Broadcasting Group, of which he was chairman. The Securities and Exchange Commission ruled that Buckley and other directors fleeced the stockholders for Buckley's personal expenses by employing devices, schemes, and artifices of fraud, and they made misstatements of facts and operated as a fraud and deceit in their manipulations of corporate property.
And he's a staunch defender of free enterprise, too, isn't he?
Basically, they were very inefficient, and they lost a lot of money, and in order to cover their debts, they fleeced the stockholder. Buckley almost lost his entire fortune on this and said he's never going to get engaged in any business ventures again. This is pretty funny for someone who has been a high priest of private enterprise and all of its benefits to the individual in the country. He himself nearly gets destroyed through his bad business practices.
I noticed that the title of that story, the headline is called "Buckley Admits He's a Dummy."
I don't know. Well, see, the thing is, Buckley, they say there that Buckley says that he knows every word in the dictionary. But Buckley's defense in this regard said, well, I didn't understand what the lawyers were saying on all those contracts. But anyway, what else happened in the media there, Doug?
Well, there's certain processes are now underway which may radically change the structure and the nature of the American broadcasting system. For instance, the Carnegie Commission on the Future of Public Broadcasting filed a report recently after meeting for 18 months and proposed a larger budget of $1.2 billion a year to finance public broadcasting. This would mean there would be an average of $5 per person to fund the public broadcasting in America, and that this money would come from the networks and the broadcasters who would have to pay a spectrum fee for their use of the airwaves, which are said to be part of the public domain. What this would mean is two things, basically. One, there would be less centralization because there would be more programs produced, and therefore each local public broadcasting station would have more autonomy to choose from the programming. Hopefully this would also mean better programming also, and in fact on Sunday night there was a new program on PBS shown called Non-Fiction Television that had a documentary featuring Paul Jacobs and the Nuclear Gang that was one of the most explosive and exciting documentaries I'd ever seen on television. So it's to be hoped that through better financing of documentaries and public television that there will be better television in the American system. It's interesting that the Carnegie report attacked very strongly the network television for its low-quality TV failing to meet the public needs for information and quality entertainment. And there's been a whole raft of voices that have seconded this report. For instance, the FCC commissioner made a speech a couple weeks ago, Charles Ferris, urging that the government communication policy should further more diversity and should promote cable TV and new technology that would create more diverse and better innovative television. Interestingly enough, even the network executives themselves are aware that their days are perhaps numbered if they don't produce better television. Some ABC top executives the other day in this meeting told this convention that the network of the future would be mostly sports, news, and special events programs, and that entertainment would mostly be through video cassettes and special production companies. But perhaps the most interesting indication that the networks are aware of the low quality of their entertainment and the need for better quality television comes from none other than William Paley himself, who in his memoirs that are going to be published next week called As It Happens, makes the proposal that each network should put 2 hours a week aside for quality television production. Unfortunately, Paley has gotten a cold shoulder from the other network executives who don't want to sacrifice even 2 hours of their precious time for higher quality television. Anyway, there's interesting changes underway in the American TV system that we will keep you aware of and keep analyzing the failures or perhaps successes in the following days.
Doug, how significant an increase is it in the budget? You say that the proposed is $1.2 billion. What was it previously?
Well,
What is it previously?
Previously it came to about $2.80 a year per person, whereas now it would be $5. So it's almost doubling the budget. So that's the most significant proposals that have ever been made for the funding of public broadcasting. And since President Carter argues that he's in favor of more money and better public broadcasting, this is encouraging. The question is, can they get the broadcasters to cough up the money through this spectrum fee? So far they're opposing it, but that the government can force it on them, which would make possible this better public television without any expense for the taxpayer.
I've got some labor news here, gleaned from several sources. In 1978, there were fewer strikes than there had been in the past, well, actually within 13 years. But these strikes were of longer duration. And there's still a lot of struggles going on. After 18 months of a fight, unionists won contract with Coca-Cola Bottling Company of Laredo. A GM plant in Shreveport is now unionized as part of a southern strategy of the union organizers. Efforts are going on in other plants all around the South. The next big one, big target, is Oklahoma City. There's a series of shipyard strikes, too, in Pennsylvania, 2 of them on Great Lake ports. These were all settled within that 7% guideline, but there's a contract in Lorain, Ohio that was rejected. That strike's still going on. Perhaps the most significant one, historically, is the fact that undocumented workers have signed their first labor contract. An Arizona citrus farm grower, which is partly owned by the brother of Senator Goldwater, signed a contract with these undocumented workers. Lettuce workers are in strike in California. I guess that's getting a lot of play in the media. For some reason, they selected that one. The big strike in Newport News is still going on with against the Tenneco shipyard there. And Harlan County, where that just mind-boggling movie was made. Harlan County, Kentucky, 14-month-old strike is still going on. Pickets are mostly women, it's been reported. There's a lot of violence, mainly from the scabs and the companies. A lot of shooting, dynamiting. Well, here's a question for the economists.
You already tried that
This
one.
is the second one. You must, well, I didn't like the real fast response.
If it doesn't work, float it again.
What are these guys,
Okay.
the high priest? Or
What do you, now, you know the answer to this, I think, because I gave you what?
Well, let's hope so.
How much money do you suppose is estimated by the banks themselves that they spend each year in money speculation around the world? Remember that one? In 50 countries around the world, guess how much money they spend?
Is this a rhetorical question, or can I answer
Your
it?
number
Yeah,
two.
do you have any idea? Do you have any idea what
Yeah,
it is?
$50 trillion in the last year alone.
You remember.
Yeah,
Okay.
$50 trillion in foreign currency speculation by the banks of the world. And remember, for those of you who can't remember, the GNP of the United States is roughly $2 trillion, so the potential, I think, for destabilization is certainly there at the least.
Well, you've got some more economic news. Since you answered the question correctly, sir, you've got to go on and give some economic
I get to go to
news.
the bathroom, too. Well, actually, my news is mostly Rockefeller news, in keeping in tone with the theme of the program. If, for those few of you who have managed to hang with us here for these many months, you remember we did a program on the Trilateral Commission, and I believe it was brought out then that one of the central tenets of the Trilateral Commission, which is this think group, or how would you describe the Trilateral Commission?
Bunch of badasses.
Well, no, just a bunch of fun guys who get
okay.
together and play cribbage and discuss
Yeah, just a
controlling
bunch.
economic systems
Yeah.
or something. Yeah. But one of the central tenets of the Trilateral Commission was to centralize economic decision-making and control over the economy. Of course, it's always done in our best interest to help get us through these rough spots, these things that keep happening, these recessions and depressions and what have you. And there are some of us who believe that the method of doing this is through the banks, and I mean primarily through banks who are promoting mergers. This is something that's very difficult to prove because of the confidentiality of most of the information you need to prove that there's something going on here. But at any rate, in the Wall Street Journal recently, we have a rather interesting article on one of the Rockefeller banks, Chemical Bank of New York, and its attempts to promote a merger between 2 of its clients, which, if it hadn't gotten messy, would have been, you know, It would have been cut and dried, and it would have been finished with by now, but this is one of these so-called hostile tapes.